Hello, everyone. My name is Era. I'm 26 years old and work as a secretary for a real estate company in New York. I recently married my husband, an army officer who's often away on duty. I thought my life was simple and steady. My job was routine and my marriage, though young, felt stable. I felt grateful for the calm and predictability. But things started to shift when I began to notice my boss's interest in me. He was a successful, powerful, and charming man, the type who turns heads. Married and highly respected, he commanded attention wherever he went. It began with little things. A few too long glances, compliments, and inside jokes that felt like they were meant for only me. At first, I brushed it off, telling myself it was just his way of being friendly. I was new, after all, and maybe he was just trying to make me feel welcome. However, as time went on, I started to notice his attention went beyond professional courtesy. He would find small ways to linger around my desk, give me extra feedback on my work, and compliment me in ways that left me wondering. Even though I tried to keep a polite distance, his glances and words began to make me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt before. At first, it was just flattery, a harmless distraction in my daily routine, but soon, his attentions began to tug at something deeper. I knew I shouldn't be drawn to him, especially when I had a husband and he had a wife and children. But part of me couldn't deny that his interest was making me feel alive, appreciated, even valued, in a way I hadn't felt before. Gradually, I realized I was looking forward to his compliments and jokes, the way he'd call me into his office for small, unnecessary updates. The attention he gave me made me feel set apart from everyone else, like I was someone important to him. I can still remember the first time he made me truly feel that spark between us. It was a moment that changed everything. The first time my boss's attention crossed into something undeniably personal was an afternoon at the office. He invited me to dinner to discuss some upcoming projects. I hesitated, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. He was my boss, after all, and accepting his invitation felt like a step toward something unknown. Still, I told myself it was just a business meal. I agreed. The restaurant was elegant, dimly lit with soft, intimate lighting that felt far from any work meeting I'd ever attended. As we sat across from each other, the conversation drifted away from work. He shared personal details, talking about the stress of managing a company, the pressures of balancing work with family life. I listened, and for the first time, I felt like more than just his assistant. I felt like someone he trusted. His gaze lingered on me a little too long. His voice softened in a way that felt undeniably personal. I found myself drawn in, not just by his charm, but by the way he made me feel seen, special. That evening, every look, every compliment felt carefully calculated, as if he knew exactly how to pull me in. The more we talked, the more I felt my heart racing, like I was walking into a dangerous but exciting territory. In the following days, we found more reasons to spend time together. Late evenings at the office became frequent, with just the two of us left working on projects. At first, our conversations remained focused on business, but slowly they became more personal. He shared stories about his family, his struggles, and his hopes for the company. And I, in turn, found myself opening up, sharing details about my life, my worries, even my new marriage. A part of me felt guilty, knowing my husband was trusting and often away for military duty. But each time my boss looked at me, I felt a thrill that was impossible to ignore. His attention made me feel desired, appreciated, in ways I hadn't experienced before. I knew I was treading on dangerous ground, but his charm had a way of dissolving my worries in the moment. Then came the night that changed everything. We were the last two in the office again, our conversation trailing into personal topics as usual. The office was dim and quiet, and the flicker of the computer screen cast soft shadows across the room. As we finished discussing work, neither of us made a move to leave. Instead, he stood up, walked over to where I was seated, and took my hand. I froze, unsure of what to do, but I didn't pull away. His hand was warm, and as he leaned closer, his breath brushed my skin, making my heart race. Then he whispered, "You're truly beautiful," his words like a spark igniting something I'd tried to keep buried. In that moment, all rational thoughts faded, replaced by a powerful attraction that was impossible to resist. He leaned closer, his lips gently grazing my neck, and I found myself surrendering to the feelings that had been building for weeks. Each touch, each kiss felt forbidden, and yet I couldn't bring myself to stop. I was lost in the intensity of it all, each barrier crumbling as we crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. From that night on, our relationship became an affair, hidden but intense. We arranged secret meetings, stolen moments at the office, and nights in discreet hotels. Each encounter felt thrilling, as if we were the only two people who mattered. I was living a double life, savoring the excitement of each moment with him, while struggling with the guilt gnawing at me whenever I returned home to my husband. 4 months, our secret relationship continued. He knew how to make me feel wanted and important, a sensation I'd been missing in my arranged marriage. With my husband often away, the absence of passion in our relationship became more evident. I'd never felt truly connected to him, and our marriage felt like a responsibility rather than a choice. My husband was kind, dependable, but the spark that I felt with my boss was missing from my marriage. Perhaps it was that lack of intimacy and excitement that made me so vulnerable to my boss's attention. One night, he and I had to travel for a work project that required an overnight stay in another city. I knew what would happen, yet I felt both anticipation and dread as we checked into the hotel. As soon as we were alone, he approached me with that familiar intensity in his gaze, and I found myself helpless to resist. That night, we were inseparable, every moment between us charged with desire. We lost track of time, and by morning I knew I was in deeper than ever before. The boundary between work and personal life had completely dissolved. After that night, our affair continued, each encounter more passionate than the last. But after a few months, things took an unexpected turn. I began hearing rumors from co-workers about my boss's wife, who was growing suspicious. She had apparently noticed his late nights and changes in his behavior. I tried to brush it off, but fear started to creep in. It was only a matter of time before everything came to light, and I could sense that we were nearing a breaking point. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, a message arrived from an unknown number. My hands shook as I read it. "If you don't end your relationship with him, you'll regret it." There was no name attached, but I knew it had to be from his wife. The tone was angry, cold, and threatening, as though she had already gathered all the evidence she needed and was just waiting for me to make the next move. I felt a wave of fear and shame. The life I'd carefully balanced, the secrecy, the thrill, the guilt, was now crumbling. I realized I couldn't keep living in this dangerous limbo. Not only were my job and marriage at risk, but my very sense of self was being torn apart. I had to end it before it destroyed everything I had. I decided to meet my boss one last time, at a familiar restaurant where we'd shared many secret meals. As we sat down, I told him about the messages and how his wife was starting to connect the dots. I said we needed to stop, for both our families. He looked at me in silence for a moment, frustration evident in his eyes. But eventually he nodded, agreeing that it was the right choice. After dinner, we went to a hotel for one final time together. Our last night was a mixture of regret, passion, and sadness. The next day, I resigned from my position, knowing I couldn't stay in a place filled with memories of our affair. Walking away hurt, but I knew it was the only way to save what remained of my life and marriage. After I left the company, I tried to rebuild my life, pushing myself to focus on my marriage and distance myself from the memories of the affair, but the weight of what I'd done followed me everywhere. I couldn't stop the feelings of regret and guilt that gnawed at me, and each time I looked at my husband, the shame returned with more intensity. He was none the wiser about my actions, still trusting and devoted, yet my guilt had changed the way I saw him. My husband's absence had once felt lonely, but now his trust felt like a burden. I kept wondering if he'd ever discover my betrayal and how that would devastate him. Time passed, and despite the end of my affair, the memories lingered. I kept remembering my former boss's words, his glances, the intense moments we'd shared, and the sense of being valued in a way that was hard to forget. My mind would drift to those forbidden feelings in moments of solitude, and as much as I wanted to let go, they seemed to cling to me, keeping the past alive. Then one evening, out of nowhere, I received a message. The number was anonymous, and the words were brief but unmistakable. "I know." A cold chill ran down my spine, and my mind raced through every possibility. Was it his wife again? Did she know I'd left the company? Was she still watching me, still suspecting something? My mind went into a tailspin, fear clinging to every thought. The affair was over, but now it felt like my life was a house of cards, waiting to be toppled. I had no idea who the sender was or what they truly knew, but I was terrified that they'd reveal my secret. Days passed without another message, but the tension only grew. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the moment everything would unravel. In the meantime, my boss, now firmly in my past, had apparently managed to smooth things over at home, at least on the surface. I'd heard he'd resumed a semblance of normalcy with his family. From mutual contacts, I heard that his wife had stepped back from her suspicions, likely reassured by his changed behavior. It was the outcome we'd both hoped for, but it left me feeling used, discarded, and more alone than ever. I had given up so much for those fleeting moments with him, and now, in his life, I was nothing but a past mistake. My husband, still trusting, had no idea of the storm brewing inside me. I struggled with the reality of facing him daily, knowing I'd betrayed not only his trust but also the vows we'd made. Our marriage, arranged and distant as it was, still held value, yet I had almost thrown it away for a man who had now moved on. The intensity and passion that had drawn me to my boss had quickly faded, leaving me with nothing but regret. One evening, as I sat alone with my thoughts, my husband came home unexpectedly early. Seeing him, I felt a rush of emotions: guilt, shame, and a longing for some way to make things right. He seemed tired but happy to see me, giving me a soft smile as he sat beside me on the couch. The weight of my secrets felt unbearable, and I felt the words rising in my throat. I needed to confess, to free myself from the prison I'd built, but as he began to talk about his day, I faltered. That night, I lay awake, unable to sleep. The thought of coming clean felt like relief, but the reality of shattering his world held me back. I knew the damage was done, but the silence between us was safer than the truth. The anonymous message haunted me, but until it came to light, I resolved to keep my secrets buried. The following weeks were filled with self-reflection. I started attending therapy, hoping to understand why I had let myself cross those lines and why I had risked everything for a fleeting affair. Therapy became my way of processing my guilt and understanding what had driven me to seek that attention, to abandon the life I had vowed to protect. Through painful introspection, I realized that my actions were rooted in an emptiness I'd been carrying since my arranged marriage. I had sought out passion and excitement, but the path I'd taken had cost me my self-respect and nearly destroyed my marriage. My therapist suggested opening up to my husband, not necessarily with full details, but with honesty about feeling disconnected. Taking her advice, I started having small, honest conversations with him about our marriage, about the emotional distance I'd felt since the beginning. He listened, genuinely interested, and we began working to bridge the gap that had long existed between us. These conversations became a small step toward healing, a way to start anew. Months later, the memory of my affair finally began to fade, replaced with the hope that my marriage could grow into something more genuine. It would never erase the past, but I hoped it could give us both a future. As time passed, my focus shifted from regret to rebuilding. Therapy continued, and I worked to let go of the shame and guilt that had followed me for months. My husband and I grew closer through the open conversations we'd started. We shared more than we ever had, not just the daily details but our hopes and worries, the parts of ourselves we'd kept hidden. Though he never knew about the affair, he noticed the changes in me, the effort to connect, the warmth that I hadn't shown him before. Slowly, our marriage began to feel real, like something we both wanted rather than something arranged. There were still moments of lingering regret, but each day I worked to forgive myself and move forward. I left behind any reminders of my affair, even blocking my former boss's number and cutting contact with anyone who might link me back to that painful chapter. I threw myself into my new job, where I was determined to redefine myself as someone honest, dependable, and focused. I learned to see my self-worth beyond someone else's attention, grounding myself in respect and the relationships that mattered most. The messages from the anonymous number eventually stopped, and with them, my anxiety began to ease. I could finally see a path forward without constantly fearing the past would catch up to me. My marriage, though still a work in progress, gave me a new sense of stability, and I was deeply grateful to have my husband by my side, even if he didn't know the whole truth. Reflecting on it all, I realized my self-worth had been something I needed to find from within, not through someone else's eyes. My affair had been a mistake that nearly cost me everything, but it taught me the value of integrity and self-respect. I'd nearly destroyed my life chasing feelings that were temporary, and that truth would always stay with me as a reminder. If you found my story meaningful, please consider subscribing to the channel for more.